April 8, 1943. High above occupied France, at nearly 27,000 feet, the thin air burned in the lungs, even through oxygen masks. Inside the cockpit of his FW-119A5, Oberleutnant Rolf Herrmchen, a 26-year-old veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, allowed himself a smile. Through the crystal-clear canopy, he watched a formation of enemy fighters clawing their way upward far below his position. They looked absurd. Large, bloated, slow. Herrmchen keyed his radio, amusement unmistakable in his voice. "Looks like the Americans have sent us flying milk bottles," he told his wingman. Below them, 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts of the U.S. 4th Fighter Group strained skyward in tight formation. Each aircraft was powered by a 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, one of the most powerful piston engines ever built. Yet despite that power, the Thunderbolts climbed sluggishly, burdened by their enormous weight, nearly 7 tons fully loaded. To German pilots accustomed to the sleek profiles of Spitfires, the agile Yak fighters on the Eastern Front, and the razor-sharp handling of their own Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, these American machines looked almost grotesque. The fuselage was thick and barrel-shaped. Its canopy resembled a greenhouse. Its wings appeared too small for the mass they carried. Its propeller was enormous, larger than anything mounted on a Luftwaffe fighter. From above, the aircraft looked less like fighters and more like bombers that had wandered into the wrong fight. What Herrmchen and every German pilot orbiting overhead could not know was that they were witnessing the arrival of the aircraft that would systematically dismantle the Luftwaffe fighter force. Within 18 months, these same machines would be hunted with dread. Their sound alone would induce panic, and their guns would become synonymous with sudden death. The mathematics of destruction were already built into those thick wings. Each P-47 carried 8 synchronized 50-caliber Browning machine guns. Each gun was fed by 425 rounds, for a total of 3,400 rounds. At convergence distance, that firepower could cut a fighter aircraft apart in less than 2 seconds. The transformation began that morning. Major Donald Blakesley, commanding the 335th Fighter Squadron, spotted the German formation maneuvering for an attack. Blakesley was a veteran of the Eagle squadrons, having flown Spitfires with the RAF before transferring to the U.S. Army Air Forces only weeks earlier. Unlike most of his pilots, Blakesley understood something critical. Survival in the Thunderbolt required abandoning everything pilots thought they knew about air combat. The P-47 was not a dogfighter. It was not designed to turn tightly or climb quickly at low altitude. It was something entirely different. While German aircraft designers pursued lightweight fighters optimized for agility and climb, Republic Aviation had built a machine based on a radically different philosophy: mass, power, altitude, firepower. The Thunderbolt was a high-altitude juggernaut, designed to dominate the thin air where bomber formations lived, and where German fighters would soon find themselves at a disadvantage. Scattered across the French sky that morning were 56 American pilots, many of whom would become legends, future aces, squadron commanders, men whose names would one day inspire fear across Luftwaffe airfields. But on April 8, 1943, They were novices flying an unproven aircraft into combat against the most experienced fighter force on Earth. German pilots had been fighting continuously since 1939. They were veterans of Poland, France, Britain, North Africa, and the Eastern Front. They had survived thousands of engagements. They knew how to kill. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 0 days. This is the story of how industrial logic crushed tactical brilliance, of how quantity and quality fused into dominance, and of how German laughter turned into terror once they learned what 8 synchronized Browning machine guns could do to an aircraft at 400 yards. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born from fear. In June 1940, as German fighters swept across France and the Battle of Britain loomed, the U.S. Army Air Forces issued urgent new requirements. They wanted a high-altitude interceptor capable of challenging the Luftwaffe's best. What Alexander Kartveli, Republic Aviation's Georgian-born chief designer, delivered was something no one expected. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his team. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The prototype, designated XP-47B, first flew on May 6, 1941. It shocked everyone who saw it. Empty weight, 9,900 pounds. 65% heavier than its predecessor, the P-43 Lancer. The massive turbo supercharger system, with its labyrinth of ducting routed through the rear fuselage, gave the aircraft a swollen, almost pregnant appearance. Pilots approaching it for the first time asked the same question: "Does this thing actually fly?" It did. And at altitude, it flew like nothing else in the sky. The R-2800 Double Wasp was an 18-cylinder radial engine capable of maintaining full rated power at 27,000 feet, where German engines were already starving for air. The exhaust-driven turbo supercharger delivered near sea-level performance in conditions that crippled conventional fighters. At altitude, the Thunderbolt was king, but mastering it came at a price. Under Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, the 56th Fighter Group trained relentlessly at Bridgeport, Connecticut. Zemke despised the aircraft at first. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft, all in training accidents. The Thunderbolt killed more Americans in training than Germans would in its first months of combat. It ground-looped violently on landing, torque-rolled on takeoff, and dove so aggressively that pilots encountered compressibility, their controls locking as shock waves formed over the wings. But those who survived training discovered something extraordinary. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, who would later score 27 aerial victories, described his first flight simply: "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." The war was about to teach the Luftwaffe the same lesson. The first weeks of combat seemed to confirm everything the Luftwaffe believed. In April and May of 1943, the P-47 Thunderbolt appeared hopelessly outmatched in traditional fighter combat. Against the Focke-Wulf 190 and Messerschmitt Bf 109, the American aircraft could not turn as tightly, could not climb as quickly at low altitude, and could not match the crisp handling German pilots had refined through 4 years of continuous war. German pilots adapted quickly. They attacked from below, where the heavy Thunderbolts struggled to respond. They forced turning engagements, exploiting the P-47's wide turning radius and sluggish roll rate at medium altitudes. They baited inexperienced American pilots into dogfights the Thunderbolt was never designed to win. Reports flowed back to German headquarters filled with confidence. Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, summarized his first encounters with brutal contempt. "The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow." Within the squadrons, German pilots gave the aircraft mocking nicknames: Indiana, Flying Pigs, Fat Targets pretending to be fighters. The numbers seemed to support the ridicule. During their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for just 3 confirmed German kills. RAF pilots watching from nearby Spitfire units privately questioned whether the Americans had chosen the wrong aircraft entirely. British humor, as ever, was merciless. "The best evasive maneuver in a P-47, one RAF pilot joked, is to unstrap and run around the cockpit." Yet beneath the laughter, something deeply unsettling was happening, something German intelligence failed to notice. The Thunderbolts that were shot down did not die easily. On May 4, 1943, a P-47 returned to base with 21 cannon holes and more than 100 machine gun strikes scattered across its fuselage and wings. Damage that would have torn a Messerschmitt or Spitfire apart mid-air. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine, lacking vulnerable coolant lines, absorbed punishment that would instantly cripple liquid-cooled fighters. Control surfaces were shredded, panels were torn away, yet aircraft kept flying. More disturbing still was what happened when Thunderbolts got their guns on target. The P-47's 8-gun battery created something German pilots had never experienced: a sustained, dense cone of fire that could be maintained for half a minute or more. Early warfighters fired short bursts. Cannon had devastating power but limited ammunition. The Thunderbolt could simply keep firing. When hits were scored, the results were catastrophic. The incident that began to change German perception occurred on June 26, 1943, over Les Andelys, France. Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, flying with the 61st Fighter Squadron, was returning from escort duty as part of a 48-aircraft formation when they were attacked by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from JG-26, led by Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, younger brother of Adolf Galland. The German attack was flawless. They dove from the sun with superior speed and position, catching the American formation at a disadvantage. Johnson, flying near the rear, was hit almost immediately. 20mm cannon shells detonated across his aircraft. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed the cockpit. The engine cowling was torn open. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. He was hit in the face and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments. He attempted to bail out and discovered the canopy was jammed. A cannon shell had exploded in the track, welding it shut. He was trapped inside a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet. What followed defied every assumption about aircraft survivability. Blind through oil-smeared glass, with a violently shaking engine and controls responding only intermittently, Johnson somehow leveled the aircraft and turned towards England. Then came the final test. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unidentified German pilot from 2/JG-26, spotted the crippled Thunderbolt limping towards the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson and opened fire. Cannon rounds slammed into the P-47. Johnson crouched behind his armor plate, waiting to die. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. The German pilot repositioned and fired again, this time with his machine guns. The heavy bullets tore through aluminum skin, control surfaces, and internal structure. Still, the aircraft flew. A third pass. Nothing. The German pilot pulled alongside, close enough that Johnson could see his face clearly, young, blonde, eyes wide with disbelief. The German shook his head. Then, in a gesture that would become legend, he raised his hand in salute and broke away, out of ammunition. Johnson's Thunderbolt staggered across the channel and landed at Manston with the engine failing on rollout. The ground crew stopped counting bullet holes after 200. One shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another struck the armor plate behind his seat. 3 of the 4 main fuselage longerons were severed. The engine had taken direct hits, yet the aircraft had brought him home. The impact of this single encounter rippled through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had built something far more durable than intended. German intelligence initially dismissed the reports as exaggeration until multiple pilots from the same unit corroborated the account. No fighter should have survived that, but it had. By July 1943, American pilots began to understand the Thunderbolt's true nature. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke distilled months of hard lessons into simple doctrine. Don't turn with them, don't climb with them low. Use your weight, use your power, use your guns. The Thunderbolt's mass, once mocked, became its weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could exceed 550 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter could safely follow. That speed could be converted into altitude through zoom climbs that left pursuing aircraft helpless below. Captain Walker Bud Mayhuron refined these principles into what pilots called the boom and zoom, though unofficially became known as the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. Thunderbolts climbed higher than German fighters could operate efficiently. When Luftwaffe aircraft appeared below, the P-47s rolled inverted and dove, accelerating beyond the ability of German pilots to aim or evade. Then the guns spoke. Survivors described it as flying into a wall of lead. Aircraft caught in the convergence zone didn't fall apart, they disintegrated. The Luftwaffe was about to learn that the joke had turned deadly. The true revelation of American firepower arrived in the late summer of 1943, during the deepest daylight penetration into Germany attempted up to that point. On August 17, 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces launched the twin raids against Schweinfurt and Regensburg, targets at the heart of Germany's ball-bearing and aircraft production. It was a gamble designed to test whether daylight bombing could break the German war economy. For the Luftwaffe, it was an opportunity to destroy the American bomber force once and for all. The defenders assembled everything they had. Among them were formations of Messerschmitt Bf-110 destroyers, twin-engine fighters armed with heavy cannon and rockets, specifically designed to break up bomber formations. These aircraft were lethal to B-17s, but vulnerable to escort fighters. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, spotted a group of Bf-110s forming up below the bomber stream. The German pilots believed they were safe. They were wrong. Schilling's 4 Thunderbolts rolled inverted from 28,000 feet and plunged toward the German formation. The speed built instantly. Control surfaces screamed, airframes shuddered. The German gunner, Heinrich Roth, one of the few survivors, later described the moment during post-war interrogation. They came down like hammers from heaven. I fired at 800 meters. I saw hits on the wing. The American fighter did not even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply ceased to exist. It was not a shoot-down. It was annihilation. One Bf-110 disintegrated in less than 2 seconds, the wings tearing free, the fuselage breaking apart, the crew compartment shredded into fragments. In under a minute, 8 German destroyers were gone. German pilots had never experienced firepower like this. Each P-47 carried 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, nearly 900 pounds of bullets. At typical convergence settings of 300 yards, all 8 guns focused into a killing zone barely 6 feet across. Inside that zone, over 100 armor-piercing incendiary rounds per second tore through aluminum, steel, and flesh. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission exposed the Thunderbolt's limitation, range, but it also demonstrated something far more important. When employed correctly, the P-47 was not just effective, it was overwhelming. By September 1943, German pilots encountered another nightmare: altitude. The Thunderbolt grew stronger as it climbed. Its turbo-supercharged Pratt & Whitney R2800 delivered full power above 30,000 feet, while German fighters gasped for oxygen. Mechanical superchargers on the BMW 801 and Daimler-Benz engines simply could not compete. This reality proved fatal on October 8, 1943. That morning, Oberstlieutenant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces with 206 victories, led Jagdgeschwader 1 against a bomber stream over Bremen. At 28,000 feet, his Focke-Wulf 190A6 felt sluggish and unresponsive. The engine strained in thin air. Controls felt heavy. Then Thunderbolts appeared above them. P-47s of the 56th Fighter Group dove from 32,000 feet, converting altitude into impossible speed. Robert Johnson, now a seasoned pilot, spotted Phillips' aircraft, recognizable by its distinctive markings. Johnson's combat report was brief and clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection. Observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Hans Philipp was dead. For the Luftwaffe, the message was devastating. If one of theirs, an ace who had survived hundreds of missions across multiple fronts, could not survive an encounter with the Thunderbolt, then no one was safe. German High Command ordered an immediate technical assessment of the P-47. The report delivered to Hermann Göring in November 1943 was blunt. The Thunderbolt's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. Its dive speed approached the limits of compressibility. Its armor protected the pilot, engine, and vital systems. Its structural strength allowed it to absorb damage that would destroy multiple conventional fighters. Most alarming of all, it could return to base after sustaining damage that German engineers considered impossible. In January 1944, the transformation was completed. A new variant arrived in England, the P-47D-22, fitted with a Hamilton Standard paddle blade propeller. 13 feet in diameter, with massive broad-chord blades, it bit into the air with brutal efficiency. Climb rates jumped dramatically, from 2,200 feet per minute to nearly 3,000. The Thunderbolt could now climb with German fighters. It could accelerate faster. It could regain energy quicker. And it sounded different. The new propeller produced a deep, rolling thunder that echoed across the countryside. German troops learned to identify the aircraft by sound alone. They called it Donnerstock, thunderclap. Veteran pilot Heinz Knuck of JG-11, with over 200 missions, encountered the new variant near Hanover in February 1944. He recorded in his diary, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We attacked expecting advantage. They turned into us and followed us upward. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke. These are not the machines we laughed at last year." By early 1944, the Thunderbolt no longer needed excuses. It was no longer surviving because of its size. It was dominating because of it. The laughter was gone. What followed would ensure it never returned. By early 1944, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had completed its transformation. What began as a high-altitude escort fighter was becoming something far more dangerous, a weapon designed not just to contest the air, but to dominate the battlefield below it. As Allied planners prepared for the invasion of Western Europe, air superiority was no longer a theoretical requirement, it was an absolute necessity. The success of Operation Overlord depended on one condition above all others: the Luftwaffe had to be neutralized. The Thunderbolt would play a decisive role. With the arrival of external fuel tanks, P-47s could now escort bombers deep into German territory and still fight effectively after jettisoning their tanks. The improved climb rate from the paddle blade propeller allowed Thunderbolts to engage immediately rather than needing time to regain energy. German pilots quickly realized that the familiar tactics no longer worked. Major Günther Röhl, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, survived a brutal encounter with P-47s in March 1944 that left him badly wounded. He later recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone joked, 'Here come the flying pigs.' No one was laughing moments later. They attacked faster than we could react. Their guns did not fire in short bursts. They poured out solid streams of fire. To be caught in that stream meant instant destruction." Thunderbolt pilots discovered something else: endurance. While German fighters burned fuel at unsustainable rates during high-power interceptions, the big American radials cruised efficiently at altitude. P-47s could loiter above bomber formations for hours, rotating top cover and remaining ready for combat. When the P-51 Mustang began taking over long-range escort duties in the spring of 1944, Thunderbolt units were freed for a new mission: ground attack. The aircraft that German pilots had once mocked as too heavy to fight in the air became the most feared weapon on the ground. The Thunderbolt's 8 heavy machine guns were devastating against vehicles, railways, and troop concentrations. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds could penetrate the thin top armor of tanks and armored cars. A 2-second burst delivered over 160 half-inch bullets into a target area the size of a truck. But guns were only the beginning. Later P-47 variants could carry 2,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, equal to the bomb load of early war medium bombers. Rocket-equipped Thunderbolts carried 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. German ground commanders experienced the effect firsthand. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding elements of a Panzer Grenadier regiment during the Normandy campaign, described Thunderbolt attacks. "They came in so low you could see the pilot's face. The noise was terrifying. Engines roaring, rockets screaming. Then came the hammer of the machine guns. A column of our vehicles simply vanished. 20 trucks destroyed in a single pass. The men were shattered psychologically. The Germans called them Jabos, fighter bombers, but this was something else entirely. These were flying artillery batteries with precision guidance. On June 6, 1944, the Luftwaffe learned how completely the balance of power had shifted. More than 500 Thunderbolts patrolled the skies over Normandy, forming a layered umbrella from sea level to over 30,000 feet. German fighters attempting to reach the beaches were intercepted almost immediately. Oberlieutenant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of the few pilots to reach the invasion area, later reported, "The sky belonged entirely to the Americans. Thunderbolts were everywhere, above us, below us, ahead, behind us. We could not climb past them or dive beneath them. 12 of us went in. I returned alone." In the weeks following D-Day, Thunderbolts strangled German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June 1944 alone, 9th Air Force P-47 units destroyed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles. The Wehrmacht was forced to move almost exclusively at night, severely limiting its ability to counter Allied advances. Nothing the Germans tried worked. Additional armor, camouflage, dispersal tactics all failed. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. While devastating Europe, the Thunderbolt was simultaneously proving its value in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group operating from New Guinea discovered that the P-47's ruggedness and range were perfectly suited for Pacific conditions. On October 11, 1933, Colonel Neil Kirby led 4 Thunderbolts against a formation of 40 Japanese aircraft, shooting down 6 enemy fighters in a single mission, an action that earned him the Medal of Honor. Japanese pilots accustomed to fighting lighter American aircraft were stunned. Ace Saburo Sakai later wrote, "We called them monsters. Our cannon, which could destroy other fighters easily, seemed to have no effect. I hit one repeatedly and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying, streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." The Pacific-optimized P-47N, with expanded fuel capacity and wet wings, extended the Thunderbolt's range to over 2,300 miles, allowing it to escort B-29 superfortresses on missions towards Japan itself. By late 1944, the Thunderbolt had evolved into a universal weapon: fighter, escort, bomber, interceptor. And it was about to face its most unexpected challenge: German jets. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe placed its last hopes in a technological miracle. The Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, entered combat with a top speed exceeding 540 miles per hour. On paper, it should have been untouchable, faster than any propeller-driven aircraft ever built. German pilots believed it would restore air superiority. The Thunderbolt proved otherwise. P-47 pilots quickly learned that jets were not invincible. The Me-262 was deadly in a straight line, but it had weaknesses, especially during takeoff, landing, and acceleration, when jet engines responded slowly. Thunderbolts waited above airfields. They waited near bomber formations. And when the jets slowed to attack, the P-47s struck. On November 27, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer of the 352nd Fighter Group dove his Thunderbolt from 28,000 feet onto a Messerschmitt Me-262 flying level below. The jet pilot, confident in his speed advantage, never saw the American fighter until Meyer opened fire at 400 yards. His combat report was concise. Enemy aircraft disintegrated under fire. Major components separated from fuselage. No parachute observed. The lesson was clear. Speed meant nothing once 8 synchronized Browning machine guns came into play. By early 1945, specialized variants like the P-47M appeared, lighter, faster, equipped with water methanol injection boosting engine output to nearly 2,800 horsepower. These ultimate Thunderbolts could exceed 470 miles per hour in level flight at altitude. Major George Bostwick, commanding a P-47M squadron, shot down 2 Me-262s in March 1945. His assessment was blunt. They're faster, yes, but they can't turn and they can't take punishment. One good burst and they come apart. The Luftwaffe was running out of time. Then came January 1, 1945. Operation Bodenplatte, Germany's final gamble. Nearly 900 German aircraft, including many of the Luftwaffe's remaining experienced pilots, launched surprise attacks on Allied airfields in Belgium and the Netherlands. The goal was simple: destroy Allied aircraft on the ground and regain control of the skies. At Y-34 airfield near Metz, Thunderbolts of the 365th Fighter Group were caught by surprise. German fighters strafed parked aircraft, destroying 22 P-47s on the ground. A captured German pilot, brought to the command post, gestured toward the burning wreckage and taunted, "What do you think of that?" Major George Boring's reply became legend. He pointed down the flight line where ground crews were already clearing debris. "By tomorrow, we'll have 40 new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" Within 48 hours, factory-fresh Thunderbolts filled the revetments. Operation Bodenplatte was a catastrophe for Germany. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 pilots, many of them instructors and veteran leaders. Losses that could never be replaced. The Allies lost fewer aircraft and replaced them within days. The numbers told an inescapable story. Republic Aviation produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war, more than any other American fighter. At peak production, the Farmingdale, New York factory completed 1 Thunderbolt every hour, day and night. The Evansville, Indiana plant, built from farmland in 1942, was producing 500 aircraft per month by 1944. Each P-47 required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of wiring, thousands of pounds of aluminum and rubber, and an engine containing 2,400 precision-machined components. And yet, they kept coming. Ammunition production was just as staggering. Each sortie consumed 3,400 rounds of single half-inch ammunition. By mid-1944, Thunderbolt units were firing over 10 million rounds per month. The Lake City Arsenal alone produced 30 million rounds monthly, each cartridge manufactured to microscopic tolerances. Fuel consumption was enormous. A single Thunderbolt burned 100 gallons per hour in cruise, up to 300 gallons per hour in combat. By late 1944, the 9th Air Force consumed over 25 million gallons of aviation fuel every month, all shipped across the Atlantic by mass-produced tankers. Even more decisive than machines was training. By 1944, the United States was graduating 30,000 pilots annually. Each P-47 pilot entered combat with 400 or more flight hours, including extensive gunnery and formation training. German pilots, by contrast, often entered combat with less than 100 hours total time. The disparity was fatal. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, summarized the difference. "I had over 400 hours logged. I'd fired at toned targets, studied gun camera film, practiced real tactics. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half that. It wasn't a fair fight." By early 1945, the Luftwaffe existed largely on paper. Fuel shortages grounded aircraft. Veteran pilots were dead or captured. Airfields were rubble. But the Thunderbolt was still coming. And the reckoning was not yet complete. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe no longer existed as a fighting force. On paper, units still remained. Aircraft inventories listed fighters and jets. Squadrons still had commanding officers. But in reality, Germany had run out of the one thing it could never replace: pilots. Fuel shortages grounded most remaining aircraft. Airfields were cratered ruins. Training programs had collapsed. The few young men who climbed into cockpits in the final months of the war often did so with less than 30 hours of total flight time. They were sent up against Thunderbolts flown by pilots with hundreds of hours and years of combat experience. The result was slaughter. Feldwebel Klaus Brettschneider, one of the last German pilots trained in 1945, flew exactly one combat mission before the war ended. His encounter with P-47s over Leipzig lasted less than 12 seconds. They came out of the sun in perfect formation, 4 Thunderbolts. I tried to turn, but they were already firing. The aircraft shook like it was being hit with sledgehammers. The engine exploded. The wing tore away. I escaped by parachute and watched my entire Staffel disappear in flames. German medical officers began recording a phenomenon they called Jabo fever, fighter bomber fever. Pilots reported nausea, trembling, and panic attacks upon hearing reports of Thunderbolts operating in their sector. Ground troops reacted the same way. The deep, rolling thunder of approaching P-47s triggered immediate flight for cover. Veterans who had endured years of artillery fire learned to fear one sound above all others: the mechanical roar that meant 8 synchronized machine guns were seconds away from speaking. By the final months of the war, Thunderbolt formations controlled every altitude, from treetop level to over 40,000 feet. There was nowhere left to hide. The statistics compiled after the war defied belief. In Europe, P-47 units destroyed 3,752 German aircraft in aerial combat, 3,315 aircraft on the ground, 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 rail cars, 60,000 armored vehicles, 60,000 horse-drawn vehicles. In the Pacific, Thunderbolts destroyed 797 Japanese aircraft in air combat, 150 aircraft on the ground, 1,500 vehicles, 150 locomotives, countless barges, ships, and installations. The 9th Air Force, primarily equipped with P-47s, flew 213,873 combat sorties, dropped 120,000 tons of bombs, fired 135 million rounds of ammunition, and launched 60,000 rockets. Thunderbolt units achieved a 4.6-to-1 kill ratio in aerial combat while maintaining the lowest loss rate of any Allied fighter bomber. Behind these numbers was an irreversible reality. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 28,000 pilots fighting Western Allied air forces. Each represented years of training that Germany could not replace. At the Luftwaffe Interrogation Center at Oberschusel, Allied intelligence officers compiled German evaluations of enemy aircraft. The file on the P-47 told the entire story. April 1943. Large, unmaneuverable fighter, inferior to German types, minimal threat. December 1943. Exceptional altitude performance, increasing firepower threat. June 1944. Dominant fighter bomber, severe danger at all altitudes. March 1945. Best fighter bomber of the war. Engagement not survivable. In 1985, former German and American fighter pilots gathered at a reunion in Phoenix, Arizona. Among them was General Adolf Galland, former head of the Luftwaffe's fighter arm. Asked about the P-47, Galland did not hesitate. "We made a terrible mistake in 1943. We laughed at this big, heavy fighter. We said the Americans did not understand air combat. We were wrong." Galland paused before continuing. "The Americans did not try to build a European fighter. They built an American one, designed for production, firepower, and survival. In a war of attrition, that is what wins." He described flying a captured Thunderbolt after the war. "The power was incredible. It climbed like it was falling upward. The cockpit was comfortable, the controls precise. It was a pilot's aircraft wrapped in armor." Then came the part that haunted him. "What truly frightened us was realizing they built more than 15,000 of these machines while fighting a two-ocean war. Each one more complex than anything we could produce, and they built them faster than we could build simple fighters." Galland smiled grimly. "We called the guns Roosevelt's piano because of the sound. Once you heard it, you never forgot it. Many of my friends heard it for the last time." The P-47 did not win the war alone, but it embodied how America fought it. Brute force engineering, redundant systems, overbuilt structures, overwhelming firepower, and industrial production without limit. The Thunderbolt entered combat as an object of mockery. A flying milk bottle, a pregnant cow, an American mistake. It ended the war as one of the most feared aircraft ever to take the sky. German pilots who had faced Spitfires, Hurricanes, and Soviet fighters without flinching spoke of the P-47 in hushed tones decades later. Because once those guns opened fire, there was no skill, no courage, and no maneuver that could save you. The laughter ended. The thunder spoke. And the sky belonged to America.